Thanks for considering this video, which offers a solution to a problem you probably didn't know you had. Here are the highlights. All current equity analytics are either ill-suited for oversight or provably invalid. While there are a lot of providers, there are ultimately only two types of analytics: robust predictive equity risk models from Barra, Bloomberg, and others that are built for risk optimization and portfolio construction. But because they're not designed to separate active from passive performance, they're of limited use for oversight. And then there are the more common risk and skill analytics from FactSet, Novus, Wilshire, and a dozen or so others that are all outdated, conceptually flawed, and provably invalid. A nice thing about equity analytics, they're easily tested and validated. If analytics are predictive, they're valid. If they're not predictive, they're not valid. Current approaches are neither predictive nor valid, and that's a risk exposure. Equity analytics influence pretty important decisions. We suggest that users should not be swayed by name recognition or marketing stories, and instead only trust analytics that they can test and prove independently. Here's the problem. Current risk and skill analytics all use the same underlying methodologies: Brinson attribution, active share, and return space style analysis, none of which model individual security risk exposures. And that's where they fail. Brinson and active share start with the assumption that all securities have the same market and sector risk. This premise, of course, is not even close to true. For example, Apple's recent market beta was 1.3, while Google's was only 0.6. Apple's tech sector beta was 2.3, while Oracle and IBM each had tech betas of 0.2. You might expect, as I did, that these differences in individual security betas would wash out in large portfolios. They don't. For example, the major tech indexes and the largest tech funds have current sector betas that range from 0.4 to 1.4. Clearly, individual securities have very different impacts on portfolio risk exposures. There's actually a real simple way to test Brinson attributions, and by implication active share. Since security selection return is defined as a residual net of systematic risk, it is by definition uncorrelated with passive benchmarks. To the extent security selection return and passive return are found to be correlated, the approach has failed. Return space style analysis, on the other hand, estimates average risk over a time period by regressing historical returns against market and style indices. Unfortunately, average historical risk has little relevance to current risk for active portfolios, and it's current risk, and more importantly, the specific exposures that explain that risk, that's required for attributions, risk control, and predicting future performance. Current risk by itself, without defining underlying exposures, is neither predictive nor actionable. Knowledge of underlying exposures is critical. These are the conceptual arguments, but ultimately, all that really matters is how well a given approach predicts future performance, how well the model fits reality. It doesn't matter how sophisticated a weather model might sound or how slick its packaging, all that matters is how well it predicts the weather. Existing analytics are not predictive, not valid, and you might get wet. It's best to only trust analytics that you can test for yourself. We're offering something new: statistical equity risk models built specifically to isolate skill and active risk, which are robust, highly predictive, and explain over 96% of out-of-sample return. The approach precisely defines all portfolio risk exposures, both passively available exposures as well as individual security exposures, that together fully explain tomorrow's incremental return, and it defines how much each will contribute. Most important, you can confirm the model's accuracy for yourself. Imagine some of the implications. Since unintentional passive market exposures are a byproduct of virtually all active strategies, when these exposures are properly defined, they can be offset, reducing relative risk while retaining the active risk worth paying for. And separating these exposures from active performance reveals persistent skill. Managers in the top skill decile are twice as likely to outperform over the subsequent 3 years. Managers in the bottom decile are more than twice as likely to underperform. Properly isolating active risk reveals the 1/3 of active managers that appear to be closet indexing, taking insufficient active risk to ever compensate for fees, even with skill. And asset owners can confirm that risk exposures are consistent with the manager's mandate, style, and philosophy, and knowledge of the true drivers of future incremental return contribute to manager discussions and qualitative assessments. In fact, this approach accurately answers every quantitative due diligence question that you might come up with. That's our pitch. The first, predictive analytics that answer every critical risk and skill due diligence question with precise, provably valid data. Thanks for considering this new approach to isolating risk and skill. If you have comments or questions, or if we can share an analysis of any particular manager or portfolio, we'd love to hear from you.